no.
Before I start this video, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being patient with me while I worked on this guide. I didn't want to rush the process for this because I knew I had so much more to learn after the rework, and I really wanted to make sure I understood everything before releasing a guide. I didn't just want to get a few wins and immediately push out a guide saying, this is what you should do, because that's just untrue. Like just last week, I figured out that Emax is actually better than Wmax, and I didn't want to publish false information and bad statistics that would not help you guys. So now that I've officially reached Challenger 600 LP, I want to share with you guys what has worked for me. So starting things off, when you look at my item set or just any game in general on my OPGG, you'll notice that I tend to stack quite a bit of resists early on. Now, why is this? Why don't I just rush a gauntlet and get my power spike earlier? Now, Riot actually changed with the new SANTE to lower his Q cap from 250 resists all the way down to 120. This means you are able to cap out your Q cooldown and cast time a lot earlier. And I think that brings much more value than rushing a gauntlet. And I'll tell you why. Cassante has 5 different resistance scalings. So if I'm fighting let's say in this game where I was fighting a Camille and a Lee Sin, typically both do attack damage. You'll notice in my build here, I actually prioritized a chain vest, I built another chain vest, and then I built a bramble vest. I didn't bother instantly finishing my unending despair. I didn't finish an item. No. Because these 3 components bring me to 110 resistances and basically caps out my Q cooldown as soon as possible. That is your goal. Your goal is to get as much resists as you can early game. Just because of how well Cassante scales with resistances, you should heavily be prioritizing resistances. For example, Gauntlet here is 2,900 gold. Why don't I just rush Gauntlet and get a power spike? Well, I'll tell you why. For 3 chain vests, which is 2,400 gold, you bring your Q cooldown from 3.5 seconds to 2 seconds, and your damage almost just goes up exponentially. Since your Q damage scales with resists, when you finish Gauntlet, you only have 50 armor. You want to be prioritizing more armor or magic resist to get your Q cooldown and cast time lowered and basically buff every single damage aspect in your kit as well. Now, after you build all your components, things can get a little bit tricky. Let's say you build 3 chain vests and you end up actually wanting to build a frozen heart. You have to prepare in advance for what your build will be for the rest of the game. This is why visualizing the entire game before the game even starts is very, very important. You have to have the ability to think forward of what you want in the game and what you're going to build before the game even starts. Because if you go with the flow, then you just end up having 3 chain vests and you finish, let's say, Gauntlet and Thornmail, and then you figure out you also want a Frozen Heart. Well, now you're just stuck on this chain vest and you have to sell it for a Warden's Mail. So just think beforehand, think ahead of time, and build that Warden's Mail in advance rather than just a chain vest. This concept also applies to matchups where you're against a magic damage opponent. Let's say you build 2 Negatron cloaks, you want to finish your Canik, but then you decide you actually want to build a Visage. Well, now you're sitting on this extra cloak, and you're not really able to effectively utilize your gold because now your cloak can't build into the Visage. So, once again, ahead of time, make sure you are building a cloak and then a cowl, so you can use the cowl to finish your visage later. So let's recap our build so far. Step 1, you want to stack as much resists as you possibly can early game. Things like chain vests, warden's mail, negatron cloaks will do you wonders. You want to meet or be very near the 120 cap on your Q to maximize the amount of damage, and then once you meet that criteria, you can go ahead and finish your item. Because once again, finishing or rushing an item like Gauntlet will not actually bring you too much damage, since you're spending 2,900 gold for just 50 armor, which is not ideal for Cassante. You want to make sure you're grabbing components before that to maximize your damage. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, what should I build on Cassante? And the answer isn't so simple. If you look at my match history, you can see me building a variety of items, and that's because I prioritize resistances to the people I'm fighting. For example, here, I was against a Shen and a Rengar. Shen does typically magic and attack damage, and Rengar does mainly attack damage. So you can see in my build of this game, I went for a chain vest for their attack damage, and then I sat on a mantle. And then I built another chain vest, and then I finished that mantle into a cowl. So you can see my components this game were a chain vest, and cowl. This adds up to 115 resists, which once again follows the Q cap rule of meeting or being near the cooldown cap for your Q. And I also matched the damage type for the people I'm fighting. I don't want to build a full Rune just for Shen, because I don't need that much magic resist. So once I met the 115 resist mark, then you can see I finished my item into Unending Despair, and then I finished my Spectre's Cowl into Visage here, and then I brought the build all together. So it's all about getting the components first, knowing what you want to build beforehand, matching the damage type of what your enemies are dealing, and then finishing your items after you hit the Q cap. Let's take a look at another game here. You can see I was against a Jace and a Kha'Zix, so I want you guys to take a second to think, what should I build into Jace and Kha'Zix here? So for Jace and Kha'Zix, this game I decided to stack armor. Pretty straightforward, makes sense, they both deal attack damage, a little bit of magic damage on Jace, but overall, mainly armor, and that's what I did. I built 2 chain vests, and then I built a cowl, bringing me to 115 resists, which basically caps out my Q, and then I finish on with my build. Let's take a look at a more challenging example. In this game, I was against a Kennen and a Wukong. What do you think I should be building into a Kennen and a Wukong? In this guide, you heard me say you want to make sure you're stacking out your Q first and then moving on to finishing your item. And there's one item that is an exception in this case, and it's Rune. Now, Rune is an exception because of how amazing it is in laning phase against someone like Kennen. And the second fact is because the build path fits what Cassante wants very well. You can see on my first back here, I bought a cloak and a mantle, and I was able to finish that into a Rune. And it didn't cost that much extra gold to go out of my way. I'm not really buying any other stats that much. I'm not wasting my gold on stats that don't matter. Compared to Gauntlet, I'm spending the same amount of gold I'm on Rune, but for 50 resists instead. In this game, I built Rune components, and then I sat on a cloth armor, just a little bit more resists, because I'm going to be fighting Wukong. Kennen does a little bit of damage with auto attacks as well. And then you can see I finished my Rune to tank the Kennen's damage, and then I built Chain Vest, completing my Q cap. So into a ranged Poke matchup like Kennen, I like to go Rune, and then into an AD item afterwards, like Gauntlet or Unending. Now, you'll see in common, a lot of these games, I'm going a very interesting build. Now, if you watched a few of my earlier videos, you'll actually be seeing I'm using this shield build. And the reason I really like this shield build is because of how cheap it is and how much Cassante can abuse this shield build. So what is this shield build? Basically, you take the lessons I just taught you about component maxing and then finishing your items and applying that to the items of Unending Despair, Visage, Thimblewinter, and an armor item of your choosing, or a magic resist item of your choosing. But these 3 items are your main goal to build. So you can see in the build path, when I'm against a double attack damage topside, I will go Chain Vest, Tear, Chain Vest, Bramble Vest. This makes my Q 110, and then I finish Thornmail, and then I finish Randuin's, which completes it, brings my build a little bit together. I like to rush Thornmail just because it gives good wave clear with the passive. Even if the enemy doesn't auto attack that much or have that much healing, I still really, really like Thornmail. You just have to be careful. If you took Demolish, then the enemy can hit you and it might affect some of your impact. So I would say if you're snowballing and you're getting plates, then I would be careful about building Thornmail, and you can first item Unending instead. How about if I want to go the shield build into an AP champion, like the Kennen from the earlier example? Well, you just need to make sure you're getting resistances, and then you build your tier on your second or third back, and then you finish your Canic into Unending, into Spirit, into Thimblewinter. And last item is optional. Usually Jaksho is a good option. Now, if the top jungle are both attack damage, you don't always have to go Thornmail. For example, here you can build Chain Vest, Bramble Vest, or you can go Chain Vest and then let's say you want to build a Frozen Heart later in the game. You want to make sure you get a Warden's Mail instead of a Chain Vest. So keeping in mind, the future of what you're going to be building relies on what you build in the early game. You need to make sure that these components actually have an item to lead into, rather than just buying 3 Chain Vests and then having no idea what to build. Now, you're also probably asking yourself, well, when should I go this shield build that you're talking about? Shield build excels very, very well into enemy compositions that cannot build Serpent's Fang, and also have a large amount of melee champions. Because when you have a large amount of melee champions, you are able to get more value out of your Unending Despair. So let's take a look at this game. I went 7, 3, and 17, and for good reason. The top jungle were both AD, so I was very easily able to itemize against them, and they have 4 melee champions that just run at you, which is great for Unending Despair value. So you can see, once again, this game I built 2 Chain Vests, and then I built a Bramble Vest, completing my Q cooldown. I rushed Thornmail, and then I built Gauntlet, and then I changed my mind. Do I need Gauntlet into 4 melee champions where they're all running at me? No, I don't actually need Gauntlet. Gauntlet is a wonderful item on Cassante. However, you should also be able to detect, do I really need Gauntlet into the enemy composition? Are they mobile? Are they running away from me? And I look very quickly at their comp, Darius, Viego, Silas, Braum. I think it's a very clear answer. I did not want to go Gauntlet this game. The only thing you do have to be careful of, if you do decide to skip Gauntlet, you need to make sure you have good runes to do so. I recommend taking Approach Velocity. I think Approach Velocity is a wonderful rune. A lot of the times in these, it's a Mordekaiser game. A lot of these times you'll see me just taking Approach Velocity and Boots, because Boots help me focus on just stacking resistance early game. If I have 300 gold, I want to be spending it on a cloth armor or a mantle instead of moving. And Cassante also has low base movement speed, so the extra 10 movement speed from Boots just allows you to basically have free tier 2 boots. That's my thought process. You can see in this game, in a lot of games, I actually just finish games without even finishing my tier 2 boots, because I look at the enemy team and think, do they have a lot of auto attackers or do they have a lot of CC? If the answer to either of those questions is no, then I don't like to finish my boots. But in some cases, like this game, where they have a Jace, Kha'Zix and a Caitlyn, I finished my boots this game because I saw they have a lot of auto attackers. I would like to have my boots here. And in another case, like this game, you can also see I finished my tier 2 boots because the enemy team had a lot of CC with Echo, Smolder Slow, Gwen damage, Leona. So just being mindful of when you should and shouldn't build boots. For example, this game you can see here, I also finished my boots early. Because the enemy team had a Cannon, a Riven, a Jhin, and a Bard, lots of CC, so I wanted to make sure I was able to move that game. Now, typically I like to build my boots when I start to team fight. For example, you don't want to finish your boots in laning phase unless the top jungler or AD and the rest of the team likes to auto attack, then you can go steel caps. But typically I like to grab mercs when I start team fighting and more CC is headed my way.
What the fuck? 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 What the fuck?